Good morning. It's lovely to be back with you again. This time I came bearing germs, so in an effort to not inflict them on you, as we greet each other after the service, I will be standing like this, and it's not because I'm sullen. It's because I don't want to pass my germs on to you by shaking your hand. Let's gather ourselves now for worship. And so the earth tilts again, leans into the darkness as it sails through the long and laden silence. As part of this fragile bubble, this bright gleam of color and life, we are carried into the winter, ready or not, carried away from the light and the long summer gladness. Other creatures burrow deep, line their nests and curl into sleep. They sink to the bottom. They fly south to follow the sun. They grow thick and bulky with winter fur. What of the children of humanity? As we tilt with the earth, may we too learn to lean into the darkness. Welcome solstice, the time of deep night, the time of richer dreaming, closer quarters, longer stories. Lean into the darkness, and let it be a time of gestation, of rest, of comfort, a time to listen to that long and laden silence through which we all sail. Welcome, solstice. Please rise as you are able and join in singing our opening song, 226, People Look East.
As we light our chalice today, I offer this quote from the author Scott Adams. Remember, there's no such thing as a small act of kindness. Every act creates a ripple with no logical end.
Revolutions do not happen outside of you. They happen in the vein. They change you, and you change yourself. You wake up in the morning changing. You say, "This is the human being I want to be." You are making yourself for the future, and you do not even know the extent of it when you begin. But you have a hint, a taste in the throat of the warm elixir of the possible.
Before you know what kindness really is, you must lose things. Feel the future dissolve in a moment like salt in a weakened broth. What you hold in your hand, what you counted and carefully saved, all of this must go, so you know how desolate the landscape can be between the regions of kindness.
Before you learn the tender gravity of kindness, you must travel where the Indian in a white poncho lies dead by the side of the road. You must see how this could be you, how he too was someone who journeyed through the night with plans and the simple breath that kept him alive.
Before you know kindness as the deepest thing inside, you must know sorrow as the other deepest thing. You must wake up with sorrow. You must speak to it till your voice catches the thread of all sorrows, and you see the size of the cloth.
Then it is only kindness that makes sense anymore. Only kindness that ties your shoes and sends you out into the day to mail letters and purchase bread. Only kindness that raises its head from the crowd of the world to say, "It is I you have been looking for," and then goes with you everywhere, like a shadow or a friend. Please rise as you are able and join in singing our hymn from the Teal Hymnal 1031, and note that we change the noun each of 3 times. May I, may you, may we. Well, we find ourselves now in the last few days of the year, tipping toward the winter solstice and the moment when, little by little, we will begin to see the days lengthening again until almost before we know it, we will find ourselves all the way back into the spring. But in the meantime, in the winter darkness, we look for ways to lift our lights. Those of us who delight in Christmas have put up lights inside and outside our homes. Those who honor the solstice will attend this coming Thursday to the ageless rhythm of the earth as it turns in its arc and tips the North Pole back toward the sun. Those celebrating Hanukkah will light the 6th menorah candle tonight. And at least up in Boston, where I live, those of us fortunate enough to have fireplaces in our homes are very grateful for the light and warmth of a wood fire from time to time, even though most of us are not dependent on it to heat our houses. Far back into history and across cultures and geography, we find the ritual kindling of light at the darkest time of year. It is encoded into us, and it is not hard to understand why. As long as we have been recognizably human, we've taken our comfort from the warmth of the community fire, needing its protection in real, tangible ways against the cold, against predators, against our own fears. Many millennia after our ancestors first learned to kindle fire at will, we still look for ways to do it ourselves as the longest night approaches. The vestigial memory is there, even now in our modern era, in which, at least in our country, darkness is never really total because of all the ambient light. Even now, there is nothing quite so fragile and hopeful as the light of a candle or a community fire shining against a large and mysterious darkness. And because we are creatures who look for meaning, we have created stories about ourselves and about this habit of lighting the winter lights. Some of those stories have lasted in the telling for many centuries. They are stories that try to explain how the sun was stolen away and how it might be brought back. They are stories about the miracle of lamp oil, manifestly insufficient for the 8 days of temple rededication that somehow lasted and allowed the light to shine. They are stories about a star heralding a baby born into poverty and danger who would become a teacher, prophet, and savior. And of course, they are metaphors, stories that then shape how we think about the shadows of our lives, the shadows of depression and grief, of political repression and war, and about the lights of hope that we kindle in response and in resistance. These are all stories about faith, about the impulse that is best captured in the compound word, nevertheless. Though we are afraid, though the odds are stacked against us, though there is no reason on earth to think we could prevail, nevertheless, let's make our stand. Just light the lamp with whatever it is we do have left, and we will do what we can. In Elie Wiesel's first book about his experiences as a boy in the Nazi concentration camp. The book he called Night. There is a scene he describes of several prisoners gathering secretly and at terrible risk on the first night of Hanukkah. Somehow, in the midst of a deprivation and cruelty so extreme that people all around them were dying of starvation, these men had managed to get hold of a candle and had found within themselves the will to light it. In the middle of a dark night of the soul, far bleaker than any of them could have imagined, Wiesel, as a boy, watched the candle as it was lighted and heard the ancient prayers recited. He could not believe what he saw, and he was filled not with hope or faith, but with bitter contempt for what seemed to him the pure and manifest futility of that gesture. What he could not see then, but as an adult recounted in his book, was that to put a match to the candles in that extremity of suffering was an assertion of the ultimate nevertheless. What the young Elie Wiesel witnessed was a kind of faith that had nothing to do with belief or tradition or even hope, since hope was certainly very hard to find in that time and place. It was instead a capacity to reach into a transcendence within, to go there and find something deep and sustaining still available. There was a way to kindle the light, even there. In his own terrible story, Wiesel recalls that when he watched his fellow prisoners lighting the Hanukkah candle, he was so filled with rage that he stomped to the middle of their little circle and confronted them, this angry, starving boy, shouting, "This is all empty. There is no meaning in your candle, no reason for it. It illuminates nothing but the idiocy of your belief." The man who had lighted the candle turned to him, calm and kind, and said, "If the candle cannot be lighted in Auschwitz, it cannot be lit anywhere. We light it here, and we find its meaning here, so that its light and meaning may be preserved throughout the world." This is a radical statement of faith. It is an extraordinary example, not so much of what it means to have faith, but what it means to enact it. To light the frail wick of a candle in the middle of such suffering was an act of power, because it declared that all of the weapons of human violence and cruelty had been insufficient to snuff out that defiant nevertheless. That defiant nevertheless that has illuminated our struggles for justice in all times and places. Lighting the candle in Auschwitz was not a way to demonstrate the faith of those who stood in the little circle of its light. It was a way of giving faith, building and strengthening and recollecting faith by practice. We who live with the evils of our own day and time and all of their fraught shadows are in need of this kind of enacting of faith as well. We are not facing the monstrous desolation of the concentration camp prisoners. And yet our need to ground ourselves deeply in a life-affirming stance toward our world is a real one, felt with profound urgency by many of us, especially those of us who have been active in some dimension of the struggle for justice. Because we know the deep weariness and the edges of despair that come from seeing very little change for the good, despite all our best efforts. These days feel particularly perilous as we see so much moving in directions that appear opposite to those we believe in for fairness and for simple human thriving. We watch policies that protect vulnerable people undone, laws that preserve our lands and water overturned, practices designed for human well-being disdained. We listen in bewildered distress as deliberate lies are blasted out and amplified by the highest political offices in the land. Sometimes the shadows are very long, and our lights can seem nearly meaningless. This is why it's so important for us to remember that faith and hope are not feelings, nor are they simply elements like grace that might descend on us, that might touch us the way the wind comes and goes out of our hands and our control. Hope and grace are elements of being within each of us toward which we can choose to tilt ourselves, even when what we actually feel is discouragement or fear or despair. They are gifts that we can embody and offer to one another, our own little flames lifted against the shadows. The Sufi poet Rumi wrote, "Magnetic fields draw us to light. They move our limbs and our thoughts. But it is still dark. If our hearts do not hold a lantern, we will stumble over each other, huddled as we are beneath the sky." It seems particularly important in these challenging days that we remember that lovely metaphor for the ways we can lift and hold light for one another. In the small dance of any given day, we each move past others who are huddled beneath the sky, sometimes locked into their own personal and quite often invisible hell, often made worse or deeper by the brightness and singing and joy of these end-of-year holiday times. We suffer addiction and depression, grief and illness, money struggles and job loss, oppression and bias based on our identities. So if our hearts do not hold a lantern, we will stumble over each other. And rather than light one another's way and be a comfort, we will cause more suffering. But the question is how to do it. How do we kindle of ourselves, of our own small hearts, these lanterns that might be of use to someone else? How do we show up for each other and for our world with compassion, which, after all, is what we know we all so need? Compassion is usually defined as a deeply felt sympathy toward the suffering of others and an arising desire to relieve that suffering. Compassion God knows we need more of that in the world as it is. But when it comes to evoking compassion, pulling it out of our own selves, it is so often so much easier said than done. That is why we celebrate certain rare individuals among us as saints, because they seem to do it so much better than the rest of us. Sometimes it seems like compassion is even their default setting. It is not usually mine. The writer and philosopher Aldous Huxley, the author of Brave New World and the Perennial Philosophy, among others, lived not only through the years of the Holocaust, but through the trauma of both world wars. His world was not one of softness and light, nor did the human race of which he was part give him a great deal of cause for hope. He struggled to articulate meaning for himself and the millions of people he influenced through his work. Huxley was asked near the end of his life what words of advice he would like to leave behind. He said, "It's a bit embarrassing to have been concerned with the human problem all one's life and find at the end that one has no more to offer by way of advice than this: try to be a little kinder. Try to be a little kinder." But maybe far from embarrassing as a crystallized form of wisdom, maybe those simple words really are the best advice we could hope to have, we who hope to make lanterns of our hearts. The difference between compassion and kindness is the difference between destination and a travel plan. Compassion is the goal. Kindness is a practice that can help us get there. The difference between the two is an important one because sometimes compassion is absolutely more than we can manage when confronted with the endlessly irksome nature of our fellow human beings. Despite our highest aspirations, these hearts of ours can be pretty stingy places, craggy little outposts where not very much flourishes, besides our prickly judgments of everybody else. If our only hope for enlightenment is to have these hearts of ours blossom into full compassion, quite a few of us will have to throw in the towel. Kindness, on the other hand, is something we can choose to enact, no matter what's going on in our secret hearts and minds. We can practice kindness even when we're feeling really crabby. We can manage a kind word or gesture, even toward the most irritating person in our lives. Kindness is available to us right now. It is a spiritual practice, just like sitting meditation or engaging in prayer. And just like them, the practice of kindness is a way to check the chatter, to check the monologue that is running along nonstop in our minds. And I don't know about the rest of you, but I suspect I'm not alone when I confess to you that when I listen carefully to my own inner monologue, most of the time what it's doing is judging. Judging and judging and judging. My dear friend and colleague, Carolyn, calls this mind, this endless monologue, judger judgy pants. And I find that particularly helpful because it allows me not to then go on and judge myself for judging, because it makes me laugh. Judger Judgy Pants. Not long ago, I was with Carolyn in the lobby of a hotel waiting for an elevator. Carolyn, my friend, who is a better human being than I am. And waiting there in the lobby with us was a couple dressed to the nines, clearly ready to go to some very fancy thing. The guy of the couple was dressed the way you guys always get to dress when you're dressed up. It looks just the same as when you go to the office. Is dressed nicely, but your shoes are polished. She, however, had really knocked herself out and was very, very dressed up. And as we waited for the elevator, my Judger Judgy Pants was just running nonstop because the skirt was a little too short and the heels were like this and the cleavage was a little bit much. And as we got into the elevator, my dear friend Carolyn beamed at that woman and said, "You look just great." And the woman lit up like the dawn. And she said, "Thank you so much for saying that. I have been feeling so anxious. I was just about ready to turn around and go home. You made my night." Kindness is in reach, even for those of us who carry around our little Judger Judgy Pants all the time. It is a way of cultivating the soil bit by faithful bit. Eventually, what sprouts there in even the most closed-up heart is compassion. We begin to really know, way down at the bone, how connected we are, that your suffering is like my suffering. Your fearfulness, your failures, your insecurity, your anxiety, those are like mine. And so we also see, not as a theory or an idea, but as the truth, that the act of kindness we offer someone else is done for both of us. We are both made different when our hearts become lanterns. As Dion Brand offered in our first reading, revolutions do not happen outside of you. They happen in the vein. They change you, and you change yourself. You wake up in the morning changing. You say, "This is the human being I want to be." You are making yourself for the future. And you do not even know the extent of it when you begin, but you have a hint, a taste in your throat of the warm elixir of the possible. In this season of lights and troubled shadows, may we be mindful of the lanterns we can become for one another. May we be mindful of the power held in each light as beacon, no matter how small. Some of them, like the Hanukkah candle in Auschwitz, become the lantern that make all other lights possible. Amen.
Good morning. I am Sheila Lay, and it is a pleasure to join our visiting minister, Kathleen McTigue, in welcoming you to today's service. We are honored to have guests with us, and we, the members, would like to greet you following the service. So if we might do so, if you are visiting, please raise your hand and keep it up. Members, look around and please take note of guests seated near you. After the service, invite them for coffee and conversation in Freeman Hall. Should it enhance your experience of future services, you can find both a large print order of service and a personal hearing assistance device on the table at the entrance to the sanctuary. If you'd like to learn more about us, please fill out a yellow card. You'll find them along with offering envelopes on the clipboards at the end of the row. Please begin passing them down your row. And members with a life event to share can indicate that on the reverse side of the card. Put your completed cards in the offering basket when they are passed later in the service. Some returning visitors may be interested in hearing about how to become a member. If so, talk with our membership coordinator, Kelly Green. Her contact information is on the back of your order. Again, to each of you, welcome. This is the part of the service where I'm given the opportunity to offer up a brief reflection on our theme for today. As I gathered my thoughts in preparation, I was struck by how often over our many years here, my husband Jim and I have had our inner lights rekindled by so many of you. Through serious illness, accidents, and the passing of our parents, we have received many gifts of caring in the form of a meal, a note, a hug, offers of assistance, and donations to the Memorial Trust. We are truly grateful for our UU family. 2 years ago, I was asked to take on the role of chairing the congregational care team, but I hesitated to accept this responsibility. Being rather shy, introverted, I was not at all sure I was up for the task. I was afraid I didn't have the right skill set to offer comfort in often challenging and deeply personal situations. Fear was keeping me from letting my light, however small, shine. I can say with certainty now that saying yes was something I will never regret. Jay and our staff liaison, Martha Nisley, keep our care team up to date, and I am inspired by the dedication of my teammates. Whether preparing a meal, visiting a member in need, offering a prayer shawl crafted by church members, or hosting a memorial reception, we aspire to act with kindness and compassion. On behalf of the team, I thank all of you who support us and keep our fires burning. I thank you for your time and your talent. We couldn't do it without you. And now, Ann Doss Helms from Stewardship will come to the podium and share a word.
Thank you. I am here to offer a very brief update and pep talk on our year-round pledging campaign. I told some of you not too long ago that getting involved in church fundraising was never on my bucket list. Change the world, win a Pulitzer, chair the stewardship committee, not really. But when I was a young adult trying to figure out where I fit in, I did dream about finding a community like this, where courageous, creative, free thinkers could both support and inspire me. Just in the last few months alone, this church has given me a chance to meet with leaders of Charlotte Uprising and with local activists who are fighting the system of mass incarceration. I spent several weeks with a couple dozen of you learning about our country's racial history and having serious conversations about how we incorporate that into our hearts and our lives. Just now, I had my very first chance to hear Kathleen McTigue do a service, and that was wonderful. And over the next 24 hours, several of us will come together to provide a brief respite from life on the streets for some of our neighbors. All of those things that make this congregation a lantern in the darkness depend on the ongoing generous financial support of the members. Even things that look like they're volunteer efforts are built on a whole lot of behind-the-scenes work from our staff. So that is why I have committed a little over 5% of my annual income to this church, and why I'm standing up here during this hectic, crazy, demanding time of year to urge you to consider doing the same. I think by now all of you know the basics of the year-round pledging that has started. Would you raise your hands if you were in the fall group that was asked to renew your pledge either in September, October, or November? Thank you so much. I will not ask for a show of hands on whether you increased your pledge, but a lot of you did, even though we looped back to you much more quickly than you would have expected under the old system. And we're just kind of starting to pull the numbers together, but that makes us feel hopeful that we'll be ready to move into what lies ahead in 2018, including a second minister and a deeper commitment to racial and environmental justice. If you're in our December group who has been asked to renew this month, would you raise your hand? Okay, not a lot of you, but so I can really zero in on you. Today is the day that we're asking you to turn in your pledges for the coming year. I will be out at a table in the fellowship hall. You can drop your card off there if you brought it. If you didn't bring it and you want to do that, we will have extra cards there. And if you don't really like that system and you want to do it electronically, you can either do it from our church website or you can just email Kelly Green with the amount that you'd like to pledge. One other thing, one very last thing, if you are in our winter pledge group in December, January, or February, shortly after the first of the year, you will be getting an invitation for our Celebrate Generosity event. And I'm not going to tip our hand, but you might want to keep the afternoon of January 27th, if I've got that right, a Saturday. Keep that open because this is going to be a good one. If you have ever felt discouraged by how hard it is to see any concrete progress toward things like affordable housing and economic justice, this event will make you want to do a little victory dance, and we all need that. Thank you so much, and I hope to see at least a couple of you at the stewardship table.
We call your attention to the announcements in the back of the order of service. Following the service, please join us for brunch in Freeman Hall. This meal is being staged by our youth to raise money for their trip to Boston this coming spring. Next Sunday, Christmas Eve, there will be one morning service at 10:15 a.m., which will be identical to the 7 p.m. evening service. At 3 and 5 p.m., we will be holding our family-friendly services, which will be followed by receptions in Freeman Hall. For more information that is available for these and additional events in your order of service, and on our Currents webpage, accessed through the UUCC website. We hold in our hearts and prayers Brenda and Lloyd Dillon, as Brenda returns home this week. Carolyn and Kurt Lord, as Carolyn recuperates from an illness. And Brenda and Michael Searing, as Barbara recuperates from back surgery. Everyone is invited to light a candle during the offering to mark a celebration, concern, or remembrance. And we ask that you honor this time with your silence.
Please join me in the spirit of prayer and meditation. Not gold, nor myrrh, nor even frankincense would I have for you this season, but simple gifts, ones that are hardest to find. I would have for you the gift of courage, the strength to face the gauntlets only you can name, and the firmness in your heart to know that you can be a bearer of the quiet dignity that is the human glorified. I would have for you the gift of connection, the sense of standing on the hinge of time, touching past and future in this moment. I would have for you the gift of community, a nucleus of love and challenge, to convince you in your soul that you are a source of goodness in a world that needs it so much. Not gold, nor myrrh, nor even frankincense would I have for you this season, but simple gifts, the ones that are hardest to find, the ones that are perfect. Let's rest in silence. Amen.
As we prepare to take up the offering, may we reflect on the words of Reverend Suzelle Lynch from the UU Church west of Brookfield, Wisconsin. We dedicate these gifts to the work of this congregation, weaving a tapestry of compassion and action, faith and friendship, hope and wholeness. We dedicate these gifts to the work of this congregation, and we affirm our lives with it. May the ushers please come forward.
I invite you to rise as you are able as we speak together the words of our affirmation of faith. We honor the strength we find when many hearts and minds join as one, drawn on by a vision of how we yet may live in a world of joy and brokenness. We honor the dance of change in which we move, life and death tied together, turning seasons, sun and shade, each with their gifts. This is our beloved community. By its light, we honor the holiness within us, the holiness of human touch, and the holiness of our world. Please join in singing our closing song, which is number 131, Love Will Guide Us. May the light around us guide our footsteps and hold us fast to the best and most righteous that we seek. May the darkness around us nurture our dreams and give us rest so that we may give ourselves to the work of our world. Let us seek to remember the wholeness of our lives, the weaving of light and shadow in this great and astonishing dance in which we move. Go in peace, believe in peace, create peace. Please be seated for the postlude.